everybody, I'm Savan from Inspiring Minds, an educator here. So today we are going to study about a very important topic, that is patterns of tissue necrosis. Why should we study this topic is that if I give you a tissue and that tissue is necrosed, okay, and I ask you, can you give some prediction that how or what was the cause of the necrosis of this tissue? What was the etiology of necrosis? Was it due to some infection? Was it due to some ischemia, or was it due to some other reason? Okay, so the pattern of necrosis, the type of necrosis that is present in tissue, gives us the hint that what must have been the cause of that necrosis. So let us start. So at the end of lecture you should know, like if I give you some tissue or you see a tissue, necrosed tissue under a microscope, you should be able to give a prediction, or you should be able to conclude that what was the cause of the necrosis. So the first type of necrosis is the coagulative necrosis. Coagulative necrosis का मतलब क्या है? That we know कि जब necrosis होती है, in the normal process of necrosis there is lactic acid production that occurs. Yeah, that lactic acid is responsible for decreasing the pH of the cell, and that decreased pH is responsible for denaturation of the proteins. Proteins are of structural and the functional type. Structural proteins means that they are making the structures of the cell, various structure. For example, your room is there, yeah, and आपके room में walls हैं, roof है, floor है. So imagine that all of that is structural proteins, and various type of liquids, juices, water and all that is present that have some functional significance is part of your functional proteins. Okay, so cells have functional proteins. One of the functional proteins that is present in the cell is lysosomes. These lysosomes that are present in the process of necrosis, these lysosomes, if they leak out in the cell cytoplasm, the enzymes from the lysosome, they're very destructive in nature, and if they leak out in the cytoplasm, these enzymes digests the cell. Digestion means that they will destroy the components of the cell, each and every component of the cell. The architecture will be destroyed if the lysosomes are working properly. Yeah, the lysosomal enzymes are working properly. But what happens in the coagulative necrosis is, due to the decreased pH because of lactic acid, what we have is that there is very severe simultaneous denaturation of structural and the functional protein. The important word here is simultaneous. Simultaneous means एक साथ structural proteins और functional proteins, मतलब जो enzyme that were having the capability to destroy the cellular structure, they have also undergone denaturation. Denaturations mean they have lost their function, because a protein, if the protein is denatured, it means the coils of proteins are open now, and that protein is of no use. So if the lysosomal enzyme that were the functional proteins of the cell, if they undergo denaturation, so will they be able to destroy the component of the cell, that the structure of the cell, the walls of the cell? No, it won't be possible. Yeah, so there is denaturation of structural and the functional protein. Functional protein is enzyme. So if the lysozymes that are there, the destructive enzymes, won't be released into the cytoplasm, or even if they are released, they won't be able to perform the function. Yeah, so there won't be autolysis of the cell. Autolysis is the cellular digestion because of leakage of the lysosomal enzymes in the process of necrosis. But here these enzymes, the lysozymes, they were neutralized, they were denatured. Yes, and also the structural component, that is the structural proteins of the cell, they also denatured at the same time. So there won't be any autolysis, that is there is no digestion of the cell by its own lysosomal enzymes. So what are you going to see in the process of coagulative necrosis is that the architecture of the cell is preserved. So architecture means the cell, normal, what we say, histology, the wall components, the structure, they can be seen. The cell is not digested away, the membranes are not broken till now. So the architecture of the cell is preserved, and this preservation is for days to weeks. It can remain preserved for many days and many weeks. So what will you see is that in coagulative necrosis, a cell, these are the cells that have undergone coagulative necrosis. Yeah, the walls are still there. You can appreciate the structural architecture of the cell, but what you will see is that the nucleus has undergone, it has been it's finished. After some time the nucleus will disappear. So you will find a nucleated cell that is without the nucleus and very much homogeneous pinkish in appearance. So such type of cells, if you see without nucleus, it means, and the architecture is preserved, it means that the cell has undergone coagulative necrosis. So, will the coagulative necrosis always be there after few weeks or few days? No. It is possible that after few days the structure of the cell, they become very weak and the cellular components leak out, and that elicits the phagocytes to come and eat up these cells. So finally, what will be the fate of these cells, these coagulated cells, the coagulative necrosis cell? The fate will be that they will be digested away by phagocytosis. Yeah, neutrophils will come, macrophage will come, they will eat up these cells and they will form what? Phagosomes, and then these cells will be destroyed. So what was the significance of learning this thing? Anybody? Okay, as I had already told you, it is a clue that what was the cause of necrosis. If you see a coagulative necrosis is in any type of tissue, it means that must have resulted due to ischemia. For example, myocardium. Yeah, there is a clot in the that coronary arteries, and that clot has caused what? Hypoxic condition to the cells, ischemia of the myocardium. And when the myocardium will be dead after some time, and when you will see that myocardium cell under microscope, obviously that myocardium cell is not going to tell you that I died because of ischemia. What you will see in that cell is the pattern of coagulative necrosis, and you come to know, okay, this cell must have died due to ischemia. Same is with the ischemia occurring to the kidney nephron. Same pattern will be seen, coagulative necrosis. Yeah. So other thing I like to discuss is we often come across the term infarct. What is infarct? If I give you a myocardial cell, for example, a myocardial tissue, and I'll say this is a myocardial tissue and this is infarct present in the tissue. Infarct means the portion of the myocardium tissue, or it is the local area of coagulative necrosis. Necrosis has taken place in this place of the myocardium tissue. So that is local area of coagulative necrosis, what we call as infarct. Okay. Where can you see the coagulative necrosis? Ischemic organs. The second type of necrosis we have is liquefactive necrosis. Liquefactive necrosis it is not that the structural and the functional proteins have undergone denaturation simultaneously. No. Okay, the denaturation of structural proteins will occur and the enzymes are very much functional, they are very much reactive. Yes, and these enzymes, that is enzyme of lysosomes that are present, they will destroy and digest means break up, eat up the cell. So autolysis is present. Autolysis is the destruction of the cell, digestion of the cells by its own lysosomal components. And heterolysis will also be there. Heterolysis means that phagocytes and other inflammatory cells will also come and they will also leak their destructive enzymes, and this will cause heterolysis. So the cell is destroyed by its own enzymatic components, and cell is also destroyed by the heterolysis, that is by the phagocytic activity. Okay. So what will be the morphology of such cell in liquefactive necrosis? As it is clear from the term itself, liquid will be present in the area of necrosis, where it is of liquefactive type. The tissue will look liquid viscous mass. The mass of the tissue, it will look like viscous mass with the liquid. Yes, and mostly such type of necrosis is seen in the cases of any type of infection, whether it is bacterial infection or fungal infection. They manifest as liquefactive necrosis. So this you should remember, it's characteristic of infection. Pus. What is pus? We come across these terms regularly. Pus means when the liquefactive necrosis of a particular area is taking place. So in that area of liquefactive necrosis there will be what? Necrosed cell, dead necrosed cells, and the leukocytes that have came there to elect inflammation. So this area of necrotic material, necrotic cell plus the dead leukocytes together, they give yellowish appearance and it is called as pus. Okay, the exception here is the exception to liquefactive necrosis. If I ask you a question that a brain has undergone, brain tissue has undergone infraction, tell me the pattern of necrosis. Most of you will say that it is coagulative necrosis, because I just told you that infraction mainly causes coagulative necrosis. But in the case of brain, you should remember, in the case of brain, the pattern of necrosis seen due to ischemia is of liquefactive type and it is not of coagulative type. The reason is yet not very surely known, but it is seen that it happens. The third type of necrosis is caseous necrosis. Caseous necrosis means the area of necrosis will have whitish cheese-like appearance. It can be attributed to the myelin figures. The myelin figures are created in the necrosis process, and especially in the cases of Mycobacterium tuberculosis infection, the caseous necrosis is seen. In such type of infection, the myelin figure, they attracts calcium ions from the nearby ECF, and it causes cheese-like appearance of that necrosed area, and such necrosis is called caseous necrosis. And caseous necrosis causes structures in the lungs. This is a lung, various structures in the lung, that is called as granuloma. Granuloma is TB bacillus plus necrotic cells, plus TB bacillus and necrotic cells are surrounded by macrophages and the T lymphocytes. We'll talk about it later, but you should know that granuloma is associated with the mycobacterium infections. Okay, then we have the fibrinoid necrosis. Fibrinoid necrosis का मतलब क्या है? That it happens because of immune complexes. In various conditions, we'll talk about it later in some other video. In various conditions in your body, many immune complexes circulate in the blood, and when these immune complexes, means antigen and antibody complex, antigen and antibody complex, they get deposited in the walls of, this is a vessel and this is a wall of vessel. So if this immune complex get deposited in the walls of vessel, they will cause the destruction of the components of walls of vessel. And this destroyed area of the vessel will attract the fibrin from the blood. Fibrin is present in the blood. Fibrin from the blood, and this fibrin from the circulation will deposit in the wall of vessel, and the walls of vessel will appear very pinkish because of deposition of the fibrin. So this type of necrosis is called fibrinoid necrosis, appearance of fibrin in the walls of vessel. So where can it be seen? Vessel walls. The mechanism, immune complex deposition and the fibrin leak from the circulation to the walls. Fatty necrosis, the other type of necrosis, is the fatty necrosis. It is not a pattern of necrosis. It is what we say destruction of lipids. How? For example, in acute pancreatitis, there is inflammation of pancreas, and inflammation of pancreas somehow leads to the appearance of lipase outside the pancreatic tissue. The lipase leaks from the pancreatic acinar cells into the peritoneum cavity. And in the peritoneal cavity, there are a lot of lipids there, and that the lipase that was leaked, it destroyed the lipid containing adipocytes, and lipids, they are destroyed and they break down into its component, that is fatty acid chain plus the glycerol, because of action of lipase. The fatty acid chain acquires calcium, because fatty acid chain have a negative charge if you see the structure. So this negative charge on the fatty acid chain, it attracts calcium and forms a bond with calcium. This process is called as saponification, that is formation of soaps, white soaps. So if the person with acute pancreatitis has undergone a surgery, the surgeon can visualize the saponification that can be present in its peritoneum cavity. So these pattern of necrosis you should know. So let us revise the pattern of necrosis. First, coagulative, architecture preserved, seen in the ischemic cases. Liquefactive necrosis, the architecture is destroyed, cell digestion takes place by autolysis and the heterolysis. Okay, typically seen in the cases of infection. Then we have caseous necrosis, typically seen in the cases of Mycobacterium tuberculosis infection. Then we have fibrinal necrosis, typically seen in the cases of immune complex deposition in the walls of vessel and the fibrin leakage into the wall of vessel. Then we have the fatty necrosis, seen in the case of acute pancreatitis. So now you should be able to understand these things, and you should be able to solve the questions that will ask you the type of necrosis. Okay, so thank you, have a nice day. Subscribe to the channel and like the channel and the videos.